folks who are attending today and maybe watching the replay afterwards. Uh, John, would you care to say a few words by way of introduction?
Yeah, thanks. Excited to be here with you all. I'm the medical director for the Nicotine Dependence Center. I've been at Mayo Clinic for about 30 years or so, and I am a practicing general internist. And I've spent my career developing new approaches for the treatment of tobacco dependence. And now we're really leaning into digital strategies to try to disseminate some of our expertise around the country. So thanks for having us.
Welcome, John. Great to see you. And Tim, yourself, what brings you to our doorstep today?
Yeah, thanks so much, Todd. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm Tim Milbrandt. I'm the program manager for clinical operations here at the Nicotine Dependence Center, and real happy to be here today. We've actually had a pretty lengthy collaborative relationship with the Truth Initiative and X, and are actively involved on a weekly basis with blogs and things like that, and really enjoy the opportunity to get to plug in with folks in a little bit different way here with this fireside chat. So thanks for the invitation, Todd.
I'm glad you brought that up, Tim. We've been tremendously grateful for the collaboration with the Mayo Clinic for many years now. And for those of you who are in the community, you are probably no strangers to seeing posts by John and Tim in there in the Mayo Clinic blog. There's a new blog just about every week in the community. We try to get them up every week, and lots of insights, research, motivational ideas, tips, ways to make that quit stick. I always have to be careful how I say that. Anyways, wonderful to have you both here today. So let's dive right into the conversation. I do have a poll I want to put up at one point to get some feedback from those who have attended here. But just by way of an initial question, I guess at a high level, how do you handle holiday stress without turning to cigarettes or vaping? I'm sure you encounter this with people you try to help in your practices and in your work. I don't know, John, you want to start us off?
Yeah, certainly. I appreciate the question. What I would say is I think the holidays are a really stressful time. I think there's lots of research that's available that shows that both the positive experiences and the negative experiences around holidays increase the risk for relapse. And obviously, the other thing that people struggle with around the holidays is all the cues and triggers. So, you may be around family members. I hear a lot of from my patients about how they are going to get together with their brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles who sometimes smoke. And there's a lot of bonding that happens around the cigarette out back at family events. And that's a huge trigger. Um, and I think there's lots of different strategies, that we can sort of talk about, that we would tend to recommend that people engage in around the holidays to manage that holiday stress. And do you want me to just go through some of those now, or just at a high level, then we can dig in, or
Yeah,
how
I
do you want
think
to do that, Todd?
no, I think that'd be great.
Okay.
Let's maybe sort of lay out the list and maybe we can
Yeah.
go deeper on a few of those.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think there's a couple things to think about. Number one, I think that people are probably aware of who they're going to be with in the holidays, and I think planning is everything, right? You're going to be around smokers, you're going to be around people that use, e-cigarettes and vaping and Zins and these sorts of things. And if those are the products that we're trying to quit, I think you need to plan. If you don't plan, you will be disappointed in perhaps the outcome of this. So I think planning is everything. Figure out who these people are and when you're going to have this interaction with them, and come up with some strategies that will help you manage that. And I think there's a couple ways to do that. You could structure the environment if you have that level of control. So you can say, we're only going to have people at this party smoking out back because there might be some other individuals in the group that are trying to quit. So I think structuring the social environment is really important. Number two, practicing some of the tips that we write about all the time on the platform, which are really thinking about mindfulness. Remember that between urge and craving and action, there's a space. Some people forget that there's a space, but there's a space. Some people think that the urge is followed by a spinal reflex that basically doesn't go to the brain. And that's simply not true. Between urge and craving is a space. And mindfulness is about taking that space and opening up that space and say, I kind of want to go smoke with my uncle right now, or I kind of want to go vape with my uncle right now, but you have an opportunity to do something different. and you can separate that urge and craving from the reflex, because it's not a reflex, it's a conscious decision. I understand we're dealing with addiction, but open up that space, and mindfulness is real about just feel through that urge, feel through that craving, and dissociate from that. I think physical activity is important. In the northern climes, although we don't have a lot of snow, physical activity is an opportunity. Behavioral substitutes are going to be really important. So, thinking about, having gum or hard candy. I'm not going to go smoke with the uncle, but I may have another dose of eggnog. Thinking about behavioral strategies that you will do instead. Once again, if you don't plan, you're not going to be able to, in that moment of urge and craving, be able to come up with a rational strategy. Planning is all about coming up with a rational strategy. Finding social support in your community or in your group, in your family group of other smokers, and hanging out who are trying to quit or who have quit, who would be supportive of your effort, I think is also important. So those are just a couple of tips that I like to think about. And I always think about pharmacotherapy. That's kind of my jam. And I always think about pharmacotherapy. Instead of going out and vaping, do you have gum? Do you have a lozenge that you can use instead? And then avoiding alcohol if alcohol is a trigger, because alcohol is a huge trigger. And for a lot of the families that I know, alcohol is a big part of the holidays. I do know some dry families, but not many. But it's a big part of the holidays, and thinking about non-alcoholic beverages. Mocktails are very popular. Thinking about bringing your own mocktail that you can prepare for others and for yourself is just a way to stay away from alcohol, because alcohol is an enormous trigger. So there's just a couple of things. Maybe Tim has some other thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ebbert. I agree with everything that you said. A couple of things popped up in my mind as you're talking. One is, that stress is a part of life, right? Stress, it's something that's there, and that we all experience it to different degrees at different moments. And of course, we think of distress where it becomes unmanageable. And I think so. Just number one, that idea of planning that Dr. Ebbert mentioned is so important, and just kind of the daily care. I know that the holidays are coming. It's here. It is December 18th today, and there's going to be Christmas, it's going to be New Year's. And what am I doing on a daily basis to just kind of manage it? So I don't let it build up before I even get to the big ticket events and things like that. To Dr. Ebert's point, physical activity is a nice thing. How do I recharge myself? If we're more of an introvert, I need some time alone to kind of recharge my battery. If I'm an extrovert, I want to plug in with people, and who am I doing that with, and things like that. So that's a big part of it. And then being prepared for when you go to those events. And we know for sure that alcohol consumption and being around other users, in this case, we're talking about smokers or vapors or whatever it might be, that those are a couple of huge relapse triggers for folks. And so planning for that, what am I going to do? And do I plan to not drink alcohol, or do I have a plan to manage it in a certain way? I'm not going to drink this much, I'm going to drink that much. Do I have support people? Who are my safe folks at those kinds of events? But I think just in the bigger kind of global picture, just kind of that reflection of what's good for me on a daily basis, that self check-in, how am I doing? And then kind of having those honest conversations with ourselves, like, boy, I know I'm really busy. I got some shopping to do. I got some, groceries to buy, but I'm feeling like I'm kind of getting, to the edge of what I'm managing. And I just need to make it a priority to kind of take care of myself somehow.
That's wonderful. A couple of things I wanted to follow up on what both of you had said. One was, I was thinking about the idea of having a plan ahead of time. Are you a proponent of, or do you recommend that you write down an actual plan? Like, these situations, these are my go-to tactics or strategies, or like, I'm the kind of person, like, if I haven't written it down, it's not necessarily real in my head. Is that something that's resonated with people that you've helped?
I think you kind of answered your own question in some ways, Todd, which is, yourself well enough to know, like, hey, I'm the kind of guy that if I need to write it down, and then it's much more likely I'm going to engage it and use it. And so I would just encourage everybody, just get in touch with what is best for you. Certainly, some people find it really helpful. There is something about the act of writing it that does make it kind of concrete, and you look at it and go, what am I thinking? That's a terrible plan. Like, that's never going to work. And it gives you some of that chance to kind of adjust it. Whereas other folks are much more like, yeah, I can just kind of keep it, kind of in my mind. And I know that if I get in trouble, that I'll tap into that. And so I am just encouraged from my side to encourage people to just kind of know themselves and and act in those ways.
Good practicality. And you're right. Yeah, I did sort of answer it for myself, but yeah.
I loved it. I thought it was great.
So I'll pose this to some of our attendees. How do you make these plans actionable? Have you put together these plans? And of course, I'm familiar with the old adage, "No plan survives contact with the enemy." What have you done if you weren't able to act on that plan, or were you able to come up with something as an alternative at the last minute? Curious about people's experiences here, and please share your wisdom and learnings with others in the chat. If you,
I'd like to see those too. And actually, if I could jump in one more time, Todd, quick, because
yeah,
one of the things that I was thinking of was kind of that idea of the fire escape plan, right? And then Dr. Ebbert was talking, that's popped in my head too, which is, it's the best time to make a fire escape plan or emergency plan is not once the house is on fire, like, oh, there's a fire, I wonder what I should do, right? And we kind of all know this, but the same thing applies here. Which if I feel like I'm getting into trouble, I'm getting into the danger zone. What's my go-to? Is it I just set things down and walk out? Is it I grab my go-to support person? I pull up my phone and I text my go into the bathroom and text my my best friend. It could be many things, but to kind of have that part kind of sketched out for yourself in advance can be really helpful.
So yeah, Todd. So what is the quote now? No good plan survives contact with the enemy. Is that what you
right,
said?
right.
Okay, I haven't heard that one, but let me just riff off it a little bit. So, I mean, I think, one of the questions you sent ahead of time for us to think about, which I did, is, what happens if you do find yourself not being able to take that space between an urge and an action,
Mhm.
and you find yourself out there smoking a cigarette with your uncle? There's an opportunity. We always talk about the difference between a lapse and a relapse. And a lapse is I find myself holding a cigarette and lighting it, smoking a puff. That doesn't mean that you have to go back to smoking a puff, pack a day. There's once again, there's a space between having exposure to the thing you're trying to quit and actually going back to full on use, right? There's another space that you can create. And that each of these experiences is a learning opportunity. When that enemy, which is usually the enemy, it's the Donald Rumsfeld. It's the unknown unknowns, right? It's not the things you plan for. It's the things you don't anticipate and don't plan for. But that doesn't mean once you learn the unknown that you can't now make it part of your plan. So this is a learning opportunity. You say, look, I just had this cigarette with my uncle. I'm not doing this again because next time they go out to smoke in 20 minutes, I'm not joining him. And instead, here's what I'm going to do. And the plan in your pocket, if you will, might actually be, what about mindfulness? What about cognitive diffusion or guided imagery? All these other sort of cognitive strategies that we talk about and can maybe dig into a little bit. Your list can be, here's the things I'm going to do instead, that are either high level, like generally cognitive strategies, or very specific, like, now I'm going to have another eggnog or a mocktail, right? So you don't have to turn that lapse into a relapse, and it may just be an opportunity to know what the unknowns are.
I'll just mention for those of you in the live webinar or who are catching this on a replay afterwards, there is a nice resource in the X community, 101 things to do instead of smoking. That is just a whack list of things that are some of those, not the cognitive level necessarily, but actual physical distractions, from chewing on a straw to going and practicing meditation, using a fidget spinner, like really just dozens of ideas that are out there that have been accumulated by various members of the community over the years. We've combined those into a series of downloadable PDFs that you can print out and literally put in your pocket and take with you over time. And you can find those there in the featured content section of the X community. If you go out there and drop in, I am shameless about promoting the community because obviously I am a big fan. But that's wonderful. I would love to dig in a little bit more to some of those cognitive strategies that you mentioned. But I don't want to leave Tim out of the conversation here if you wanted to jump in and say anything as well.
Yeah, sure. I was thinking about the smoking with your uncle idea, right? And part of me the counselor side of me is kind of like, yeah, so what is it that I'm, really getting out of that? Is it just an excuse? I don't really like my uncle. I just really want that nicotine hit. Or, is it like, no, I really value this, this time with him, and no, we're the only two that smoke. And so we go back and it's really our connection time. But I know that engaging in this is going to put me at risk. So to get creative, and again, this is part of that planning idea. What can I do to create a space? Or maybe I reach out to him in advance and say, hey, love to go for a drive with you. Love to, can we have it some time in the den, or, whatever it might be. And just set that expectation and not wait for it to kind of happen by accident, and then be disappointed and feel like you need to go smoke. But to kind of, find a way to kind of try to create what it is that's meaningful to you about that interaction and that connection, whenever possible.
Yeah, and then thinking about the cognitive strategies, I mean, I wrote down, 4 or 5 of them here, just kind of thinking about. We talked a little bit about mindfulness, creating that space between urge and action, right? There's something about guided imagery. There's good data about, when you have a craving or an urge, sort of reassessing and sort of having guided imagery, saying, okay, well, what I do when I'm having that craving and urge is I wanted the image is not me out smoking with my uncle, which we're going to riff on for the rest of this hour, I'm sure. But it's not smoking with the uncle, but it's when I'm feeling healthy and I'm feeling good and I'm walking with my dog and I'm not smoking. Some of that intentional, purposefully reframing the situation into now what's going to happen is the uncle and I are going to smoke. What's going to happen is, no, I'm going to actually avoid that urge, manage that urge by thinking about, to Tim said, managing yourself and taking care of yourself. When I'm taking care of myself and not smoking, this is how it is, and this is how I feel. Cognitive distraction, doing something else. Perhaps your grandmother is not a smoker, your uncle is, but maybe that's a moment when the uncle's away and out there doing that. You can take some time and spend time with another relative that's important to you who doesn't actually engage in that behavior. So it's some sort of distraction. And then cognitive reappraisal. So cognitive reappraisal refers to the fact that when I'm having an urge and my next inclination is to smoke, to really tie that where that smoking is going to lead me is to worsening of my lung disease, concern about my heart disease, all that anxiety comes flooding back. You get that momentary relief from the nicotine, but then it buys you all the rest of that. And so tying that use to something that is negative for you, that is going to lead to something you don't want, is what they call cognitive reappraisal. So I think there's just a couple of cognitive strategies that all sort of fit in that cognitive realm, and there's different approaches to each.
I wanted to add to that. I think, those reappraisals aren't always necessarily even tied to like my long-term health, but I've heard people in the community talk about on the other side of their quit, how much they didn't realize that the nicotine just smells, or
Yeah.
that cigarette smell that gets in your clothes and your hair, and just not wanting to be that way anymore is maybe a nice way to even sort of reappraise.
Yeah, and we talk to patients all the time who, we just finished the intensive tobacco treatment program where we have we had 8 people this time for 5 days, and almost without exception, they said, it's amazing after 3 days how I can smell things again. And actually they were sitting in a restaurant. There's a little restaurant that I can see from my window here that they're all sitting in, and they were all quit now. It was Thursday of the 5 days. And a smoker at the next table went out, smoked, and they came back and they all smelled him. They're like, I smelled like that? I can't believe I smelled like that. So after you do all that work to get it out of your clothes and out of your car, not that reappraisal is, maybe not your long-term health consequences, because smokers do something that's really important to kind of think about. It's called delayed discounting. So delayed discounting, to your point, Todd, is a behavioral economics term where if I told you that if you smoke today, which is going to give you this much benefit, was going to cause you cancer today, which is going to give you this much harm, when the harm is greater than the benefit, you decide not to smoke. But what smokers do is they actually say, I'm going to get benefit from smoking. This is benefit. Here's the harm if I got cancer today. But what they know is they're smart. Cancer is not going to happen today. Cancer is going to happen out 20 years. So then what they do is they take that 20-year discounting to the decision to smoke today, and the decision is to smoke. Because they say, I'm not worried about something 20 years from now. I'm just trying to get through the next 20 minutes. So trying to understand that's how the brain works and how the brain makes decisions is a hack. It's a hack to understand that it may not be your health, to your point, Todd. It may be something more immediate, which might be helpful to maybe change that behavioral decision to not engaging in that behavior in the current moment. I agree with that.
It's really interesting. I wanted to take a pause and just invite members of the webinar here. You jumped in to share maybe what strategies you've worked on with yourself, especially over the holidays, or any particular anxieties or things that you may have that you want to John or Tim to comment upon here. I am going to pause here and just drop up a quick poll here about holiday stress. And
Yeah, I'd love to hear from the group too, Todd. I'd love to hear like if they have one thing that either one strategy that they think is, they plan to use, or one situation that they think is going to be tough. I'd love to see what some of those would be if they could just drop one thing in the chat there.
Yeah, yeah, and this is just sort of a little short answer thing, but yeah, as Tim said, any one thing you do or something on your mind with regards to your holiday quit here, if you just take a moment and respond to the poll. I'll give folks a minute to work on that. In the meantime, while we wait for people to respond to this, I am curious for those individuals who are trying to quit vaping as opposed to working on cigarettes. Is there a different set of concerns or stressors that you find from those who are trying to quit that particular uh, uh, habit that you offer any different advice? I'm not expressing myself very well, but
Yeah, but I understand where you're coming from. And so the biggest thing that we see, so we don't recommend e-cigarettes for smoking cessation, and there's a couple reasons for that, and we've written about that in the community. But one of the reasons is that we believe that there is a misperception that if you reduce your smoking rate by substituting that with e-cigarettes, that you're reducing your harm. And what we know is that 50% of the risk that people have for stroke and heart attack with at 2 packs per day, half of that risk is achieved at 1 cigarette per day. And that means that 1 cigarette significantly elevates that risk. And so that's why I always say the only safe level of smoking is no smoking. Hard stop. Now what happens is they have the devil's bargain. They say, well, what if I reduce from 20 cigarettes to 5 cigarettes? See this all the time in my practice. And they're saying, hey, Ebbert, look, I'm down to 5 cigarettes a day. I said, that's great. But what's happening is they're mixing the e-cigarettes with the conventional cigarettes. And in fact, there was an article that was just published on lung cancer, came out like 3 weeks ago, that looked at lung cancer risk with people that smoke and vape compared to smokers alone, and that the risk of lung cancer is greater with cigarette smoking and vaping compared to cigarettes alone, which blew my mind.
wow.
And there might be some reasons for that. Maybe epidemiologically, there's some challenges trying to understand that, but it may be that the carcinogens, the formaldehyde, the acetaldehyde that come from the e-cigarettes are actually pro-oncogenic, and they promote the growth of cancer that are established by cigarettes. So what we know that 50% of all cigarette smokers who try to quit with vaping wind up on both. And then people sort of have this sense of security that they're smoking less, but it's fiction. And so that's why we don't actually support vaping as a cessation strategy. Plus, it's not FDA approved for smoking cessation, which is a huge safety concern in our book.
Got it. I think we've had some people participate in the poll here. I'm going to end the poll. Thank you for that, and got a couple of great comments as well in here. But I'm just going to share the details of the poll here. I think, well, are people seeing the answers? I think I might be running into a bit of a glitch here.
That's okay. I'm gonna, as you work on that, I'm gonna just talk about. So vaping is challenging because the smell and taste is overall pleasant, even to non-smokers. So yeah, so one of the challenges with any addiction is that when it's sort of not socially unacceptable, it's actually an entree into continuing and perpetuating the behavior, right? So if you're like, oh, I'd rather have you vaping than smoking, then people lean into the fact that vaping can smell like juicy fruit or banana, those sorts of things. But the problem is, of course, that those flavoring agents in contact with a heated coil, burning at about 350 degrees Celsius, transforms those flavors that everybody smells into carcinogens in the lungs of the user. So we're concerned about the safety risks.
Wow. Yeah. So let's see. I'm just going to do, this will probably be easier.
I might add one thing too while you're finishing that up, Todd,
Yeah.
which is kind of going back to that idea. Oh, there it is.
Great ideas here. So planning ahead, bringing a substitute, sunflower seeds and distraction activities, replacement like gum or lozenges, texting a friend for support. Yes, it is hard. And prayers and alone time. Yeah, there's a spiritual element as well. These are interesting. I don't know any reactions from you gentlemen.
Yeah, I think that I think the addiction community. So I spend time at the American Society of Addiction Medicine, and when you're in the addiction community, there is this sort of beautiful philosophy about addiction in general. Alcohol, obviously, other hard drugs that we talk about, but tobacco is that there is a belief in the addiction community that addiction is a disease of the soul, that it really comes from those deepest places. I believe that whatever your spirituality is, that addiction is actually a little bit of a hole that you're trying to fill with a substance, right? And so there is that aspect of that, and I understand that, and I think we all have pain, but I think addiction at the fundamental level is about escaping pain, and a lot of that trying to understand that pain, which not everybody has the time or the resources to do deep, you know, to get on the couch with Sigmund Freud and figure out what it is, right? We don't always have to do that, but we can manage it through behavior. But there is that a little bit, that spirituality sort of aspect of this is really powerful, and I think it's generally embraced by the addiction community, which is a spiritual community. And the quote that I like from AA is that religion is for people who are afraid of going to hell. Spirituality is for the people that have already been there. And I think that's a beautiful quote that just sort of shows that when you go through really hard things, you learn so much about yourself. This is a journey of self, right? Because you're smoking the cigarettes and you're getting the harm and you're having all the adverse events. And I'm watching people die in my practice still today that I can't get to quit. And a lot of that is just about trying to do that deep work. And it doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to involve a lot of crying. But what it does have to be is just understanding yourself.
I really love that. So I just wanted to acknowledge some really interesting comments, both just to the panelists and in the general chat as well. One of the participants mentioned vaping being so challenging because of the smell and taste being overall so pleasant, even to non-smokers, where it's welcome in many homes. That is a unique challenge of the vaping side of things.
Yeah, I agree. And that we're putting together a manual. Tim and I are putting together a e-cigarette manual that's got specific interventions for e-cigarette users, and it's an intervention manual that we'll provide to our e-cigarette users that we see a lot of. And one of the things that's important to remember is that with vaping, the use of the advanced generation e-cigarettes with the use of the salts, that the nicotine delivery to the brain is the same as with conventional cigarettes. And why that's so important is because what makes a drug so addictive is the speed at which it gets into the central nervous system and in what concentration. All the medications we use to treat addiction are much lower, much slower, allow a bridge, control cravings, and prevent relapse. We know that. But What vaping does is it perpetuates those high nicotine concentrations in the brain, perpetuating that need to have that hit, to have those nicotine delivery. And e-cigarettes do it in spades. So that's a challenge.
Very, very powerful. I just wanted to acknowledge some other questions that came up here. Someone asked the panel here if we have any Zoom meetings about trying to quit. Specifically, we haven't, but we are looking at programming for 2025. And so if that's something that's of interest, let us know about that in the community as well. We did run some events called the X Cafe a couple of times, actually once a month over the past year. Had some limited participation in it, but we always had a coach available for talking about your quit in the space. And it's a nice way to get some one-on-one direct help. And of course, if you are a sponsored member of the community, you have access to a quit coach from Mayo and can get some help in that fashion as well.
Todd, can I pick up a question from Riley, which I think is a great question? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Or how do you want to do that?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So Riley sent this to the panel as well, so I'll read it out. Riley says she likes the mention of cognitive reappraisal. She's early on, 24 days off vape after 7 years of vaping, currently using lozenges and patches, and difficult to think about her why sometimes in regards to health reasons, since she hasn't seen any positive benefits so far. So she's hoping to see some benefits by staying stopped and appreciates hearing about the health risks. Thank you for sharing that, Riley. Appreciate that.
I don't know if Tim has any comments, or I have a couple of reflections on that.
Go ahead, Dr. Ebbert. That's fine.
All right. When I zone, I mean, I talk too much. I mean, you just got to tell me, Ebbert, you talk too much. But anyway, so I always relate it to patients I see. And I think this is a great question because, I became passionate about tobacco dependence work 30 years ago in clinical practice when I literally had patients die with me holding one hand and with a cigarette burning in the other. I mean, that's a real story. So I became very passionate about this work. And so when we think about other things like Zyn now and vaping, what are the things that we can say that at the age of 25, what is your why? And one of the things I hear from adult smokers who have tried to quit is that they feel like they have to, but they don't want to. And what that is that, when we talk about that, we know that early on in addiction, the why of using is because you're managing something, anxiety, stress, depression, the hole in your heart, all these things that we might be different for everybody, but those sorts of things. And what we talk about is incentive salience. The incentive to use is the salient experience of that drug causing some effect. And as you go on in your career of addiction, you get less incentive salience. You don't want it, but you need it. And so Riley quit after 7 years, and she might not have been in that longer phase, but Tim can attest to this too, is that I feel like I don't want to smoke anymore, but I have to. And when they talk about the want, they talk about, I don't want to spend the money. I don't always want to have to think about, I need my keys, my wallet, and my cigarettes. That there is literally the monkey on their back. We have a picture in our office, I think, of the monkey on her back. And that monkey is addiction. That monkey is the other elephant in the room. Everything you do is you are actually having to manage that addiction because you have to buy the e-cigarettes. You might not have health effects, but you're getting rid of very early on, and congratulations to you for doing that, of trying to, get that monkey off your back. The one last comment I would make is that the data is very suggestive that if you have children and they see you vaping or using any kind of substance in the home, including alcohol, including social drinking, all those things, it normalizes drug use. And that the kids of people who use substances are not also more likely to use that substance. They're also way more likely to use other harder substances, such as marijuana, cocaine, those sorts of things, heroin. And so some of this is modeling. You may not be, you're not having lots of health effects, Riley. That's great. but you got the monkey off your back, and you're also setting a good example for the people around you. That's what I would say. There's other things that are not as, my health, but are actually also bigger constructs that you can think about and appreciate and value and, in your success.
And yeah, I would add on to that, Dr. Ebbert, in regards to Riley's comments and questions there, that I hear what you're writing there, which is I'm not seeing any benefits currently, and you're young, you're taking this step, and it's kind of like I think of it as you're investing in your future benefits. You may not see them right now, but you're reducing your risk for all sorts of potential problems in the future. The other thing is, a lot of times when people start using these substances, we feel like, hey, I'm in control. I'm choosing when I vape. I'm choosing when I smoke. I'm choosing when I drink. And for some people, they can manage it, right? But for lots of people, they can't. And so at some point, it shifts and it becomes now it's in control of me. I'm not in control of it. And that's maybe part of what you're referring to, Riley, which is wanting to kind of get rid of that sense of, wait a minute, either maybe it's already has been in control and you're busting loose of that, or there's concern that it might be heading that direction. I don't know anybody who starts off with their first cigarette or their first vape and says, I can't wait until I can get to the point where I just am so addicted to this that I can't go more than a few hours without it. Boy, that's going to be a great day. Nobody says that, right? That doesn't happen. And yet what we find in our practice is that it does happen. So it's unpredicted, right? People don't expect it, and yet it tends to happen frequently. And so I think that's part of the thought of what's beneficial about stopping this stuff, even if I don't see immediate health benefits, is either avoiding that sense of it's now in control of me or shaking loose of it.
Yeah, I never met a smoker, Tim and Todd. I've met a lot of smokers that say, I'm glad I quit. I've never met someone recovering from addiction saying, I'm sorry I quit. I never hear that in 30 years that I've been here. I've never heard that. So there's something to that, what Tim, you said there. I think that's powerful.
Thanks for that really great response for Riley, and saw her thank you there. Thank you for the question. Really excellent topic of discussion. I see there's another comment here from Russ, who is talking about being a smokeless tobacco user, and asking, is there a way to stay connected to the X community and Mayo resources while eliminating this all quitters are trying to quit smoking trigger?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I appreciate Russ. I appreciate the question. So for years, so starting back in 2000, I was the smokeless tobacco guy. I did research on smokeless tobacco. We set up treatment programs for smokeless tobacco. We wrote a manual about smokeless tobacco. And I think I always felt bad for the chewers that would come to our ITTP, because it'd be like one, and then there'd be like 8 smokers, and so they always felt a little marginalized, and I always made sure they didn't feel marginalized. I think what I learned from smokeless tobacco treatment is that a lot of the principles are the same. The risks are different. The oral cancer risks, we know that smokeless tobacco is an increased risk for oral cancer. We also know it increases the risk for kidney cancer and pancreatic cancer. It's not as much of a risk factor for lung cancer as we think about with traditional smoking. So I agree with Russ that the community really focuses on cigarettes at times. I think what I would encourage Russ is stay engaged and try to learn, because a lot of the principles, because I studied it and I study it to this day, a lot of those principles are translatable. The behaviors are different, but the principles, like relapse is common among chewers. Chewers struggle because chewers can get away with it, and there isn't as much negative social pressure about it. You don't smell bad necessarily. Your breath is bad, because I've had a lot of chewers come in and say the breath isn't good. And I had a chewer that's one of my case examples of the wife wanted the patient to come see us because his breath was bad. So thinking about just some of those common elements, understand the behavior is different, the risks are different, but there's a lot of commonalities there. But I hear you, Russ, and I appreciate your comment.
Well, I see we're probably winding down here in the time we have left for the conversation. I wanted to give time for each of you to maybe give a reflection or maybe one piece of encouraging advice over the holidays. before we wrap up here. But just as sort of like one last question, I wanted to come back to something we talked about a little earlier, which was one of the strategies for dealing with the temptations and stresses of the holidays is exercise. And I'm wondering, to get into maybe a specific about that, are you talking about being on a regular regimen of like going out jogging or yoga or something like that? Or is this something that when I'm in a social situation, like, and I'm feeling that stress, getting out and taking a walk right then, like just walking away for 5 minutes and getting the blood pumping and moving a little bit, or maybe it's a little bit of both. I don't know.
Yeah, great question. I wrote an article, a blog here recently. I'm not sure if it's published yet. I can't remember the timing of it, but I did write about exercise. There's good data that suggests that aerobic activity reduces craving. Um, and they were really talking about outdoor walking versus indoor walking on a treadmill. And then intensity. There's some debate about how intense it needs to be. I think that when you're quitting, and you're in the process of quitting, I think exercise is really something that makes you appreciate your breathing better. It's motivating when you're on a I mean, when you are exercising, you're also eating right. When you're not eating right, you're not actually. I mean, like they go hand in hand. So when you're on that plan, it becomes part of that. Well, I'm not smoking because I want to run and I'm appreciating how running feels. Now, when you're in a family situation and you're all clustered in your living room, it is hard to get away. So exercise, but we know that brief periods of activity, even walking, and also kind of reset it. But basically what it is, it's a psychological reset. And sometimes patients need to go to another room, and just to get that break. I think someone had mentioned a mental break from the family on the chat here. So I would say that during the holidays, it's really hard to keep that because you're traveling and you're getting together with families. It's hard to get on the Peloton when you're in the middle of a family, dinner. But getting away from that dinner and having brief bouts of physical activity is helpful.
Great clarification. Thanks, John.
Can
So
I add something to that, Todd?
yeah, please do. Please do.
Yeah. I agree with everything Dr. Ebbert just said, and I think as you kind of posed in your question, I think it can be a combination of I'm going to do something regularly, and I'm going to do something maybe in a moment as in an acute situation as well. I'm a big fan of kind of normalizing this term exercise or kind of making it more attainable. I think for lots of people, they hear the word exercise and they go, "Oh my gosh, that's not me." I mean, I was not one of those people in high school or college, or I'm not a marathoner, I'm not a weightlifter, and I think that just to say that's okay, but find something for you that gets your body moving. That is at a minimum is okay. Ideally it's something that you actually enjoy, but at a minimum, something that's not drudgery. Because if it's something that you just loathe, you're almost certainly not going to do it, at least not when you need it and not consistently. So finding something that's a good fit, and it can be something like just walking, just getting your body moving a little bit, those kinds of things. So I would just add that little sprinkle in the end there.
I love that. And it's almost a plug for the community as well. I will note that there is a long-standing thread called Let's Get Moving Part 3 in the X community. And it's that exact phrase you used, that like, let's not put a lot of stigma to exercise, which can be a sort of an off-putting word, but moving, just get yourself moving. And one of the things that I absolutely adore about that particular thread, again, it was organically started a couple of years back, and it is going strong. I think it's probably one of our longest running discussions in the support area of the community. That it's a great way for you to not only like get out and exercise, but then go and be self-accountable to that and report it back in the community, and you'll get praise from others for that. So that affirmation from people in the community, I think, is not to be diminished. Really love that. I see we're running down on time here, and I want to give time for each of you to maybe give a reflection or some final thoughts, a benediction, if you will, to those going into the holidays here. Just any last minute reminders or thoughts that you may have. John, I'll start with you.
I appreciate the discussion. I would say that I think having a plan is maybe one of the things I would emphasize, and thinking about the 101 strategies of what to do instead of looking at that list and curate it for your own purposes. might be helpful, because 101's a lot. Maybe you just need 5, and sort of tailored for your own use. But I think the holidays are a wonderful time. They're also a very stressful time. And I know that I've had some patients who have, decided to take a break from their family for 1 year while they're trying to be successful. And I'm not suggesting you do that, but I want you to open. The reason I bring that up is because I want you to open yourself to the university of possibilities, because this is about you. This is about your health. And yes, family obligations are important. Family connection is really important for your health, but also you need to give yourself the space and the time to be successful. And if the holidays are tripping you up and you don't, and the strategies aren't working, think about other things. I'm not saying divorce your family. That's not what I'm suggesting, but I'm saying that this is about you. And if that's a really big trigger for you, make the decisions that are right for you and your health, because at the end of the day, your family's not managing your illness or the consequences of your smoking, your addiction. You are. And that's what I leave you with. And you can do this and be successful and stay engaged with the community. So thank you.
You can do this. I love that. Tim, over to you.
Thank you. I just want to take a quick second and acknowledge Robin's comments in the chat there quick too. It sounds like, boy, what a tough experience you had with your mother. And so sorry to hear that. And if it's an ongoing struggle for you, I really encourage you to lean into the community and find some professional assistance to kind of tackle this thing. And what a tough situation. Yeah, and I think to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Ebbert was saying as well, kind of taking care of yourself. My brain is kind of drifting towards this idea of, what does that mean for me? And is I get my support from the community or somewhere else professional, or is it somebody who I really am close to and trust in my life? And how do I, make that ask, making it a priority for yourself to say, hey, John, I got something I really want to talk to you about. Can we find some time in the next few days? And, and then sit down and then, and say, hey, here's where I'm at. This is what I'm working on. And I just feel like it'd be really helpful to have somebody that I kind of know as my go-to person and to be able to utilize that, and you don't have to do it a lot or any more than you feel you need to, but sometimes just feeling like you've got that kind of that teed up already with somebody when things are tough. It's sometimes a hard moment to make a confident decision about, I'm going to reach out to somebody, even if I'm close to them. And so kind of prepping that ahead of time when you're not in the house isn't on fire, if you will, and kind of, getting that ready so that if you do need it, you've kind of got that going for you in that moment.
Really great encouragement, Tim. Thank you so much for that, and thank you both for bringing your wisdom, your practical knowledge, and the clinical understanding you have of addiction and quitting and addressing this issue that affects so many of us during the holidays. It's been a wonderful discussion. As I said, we will. This session has been recorded. We will be posting an edited version of this talk up in the X community for replay if you'd like to see it. It'll also be up on social media. I believe we tend to put it on YouTube, and there might actually be a couple of reels that come out from this, and to hopefully get the message out to others during this time. And thank you to all of you who joined and stayed with us through the webinar today. I hope you found value in the conversation, and those of you who were willing to share your own journey and challenges that you've had. I hope you were able to find help, and thank you for sharing so that others can learn in this process as well. This has been a Truth Initiative webinar as part of the X community. I hope that you join us at community.xprogram.com. And it is free to join, or if you're a sponsored user, you can get access to live coaching help. We do these events throughout the year. Look for a post about upcoming programs in 2025. But in the meantime, I hope that the holidays treat you kindly and you take care of yourselves, be good to yourselves, and we will see you in the X community in the near future, if not already. That's it for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us, and Happy New Year in advance. Talk to you soon. Thank you both, gentlemen.